Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have Bryan Boorstein back on. I had Steve Hall on last week, and I've lost track how many times. I've got to be getting close to 10 now, I feel like, at this point that you've been on to the pods. Always good chat, always kind of general outline, but I feel like our conversations just go wherever I feel like it's interesting. But yeah, man, good to have you back on.
Yeah, man, just trying to keep the bromance alive.
Yeah, I got asked that. I'm like, I don't know if any of those people think I'm their bro, but definitely feel like these guys are my bros out there. So it was interesting to think about who that was. What about you? Who do you feel like your big bros like on social media?
I talk to Jordan a lot. He and I think, talk about things like even beyond fitness sometimes, which is cool. Obviously, you and I communicate probably as much as anyone else. Who else do I talk to? I have a number of, I would say there's like 20 people that follow me and I know them by handle.
Yeah,
And we actually have like real legit like back and forth DMs, and they ask insightful, thought-provoking questions that create good discussion around different ideas in the industry and things like that. And so I enjoy those conversations. I don't know, man. Overall, like I've been spending less and less time on social media, and
not a bad thing.
yeah, it's even like I go days now and I don't even update my story sometimes, and I have this internal sense of guilt about it where I'm like, oh, the algorithm's gonna hate me, or like next time I post a story, the viewers are gonna be so low because I haven't been posting. And then I get so into not having to go in and check my phone. Like when there's no story up, there's no engagement. Nobody's hitting me up like on my DMs or anything out of the blue in most cases. And so I find myself logging into Instagram less, which is just all around very positive. And I get into this, like in the last 3 days, I haven't posted a single story, and it's not like I haven't been working out. And that's what people always expect of me is they're like, oh, Bryan posts his workouts. Like no matter what you think of it, whether it's narcissistic or whatever, it is something I do. And I think there's some value in it for my followers. So I always post, here's the cardio I did today. Here's the weights I did today. And I haven't been doing that. I've still been working out. Doesn't mean I'm taking time off, but it's just been really nice to be off of it more and just live life, live real life.
What is it was it just something that kind of just naturally happened, or was this like a kind of by choice type thing? And then it's like one day it turns into a couple and you're like, oh, this actually feels pretty good.
I would say it more naturally happened than was a choice. Like I'm both pulled in two directions. I'm pulled in the direction of screw social media. It's so bad for mental health, and there isn't really much value. Like I'm not really learning much on it anymore either, and it's extremely divisive politically and like all of these things. And then on the other side, I'm like, I don't post much. Maybe I should commit to 30 days of 30 posts and just like, go all in and see if I can re-engage some of my followers or get new followers or whatever. And so even I, which I think I lean much more toward the former, the side of getting off Instagram, I'm still pulled by that idea of what if, like maybe I can grow my platform and it can help my business and create more opportunities and all of these things. So it's both for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you like what would be the driving factor for you to want to post? Because like I looked at your Instagram and I'm like, oh, he doesn't have a story. I just didn't know if you were like super busy that day, but like sounds like you are purposely spending a little less time on there. But for you like making the post, like what for you would that be mostly like kind of growth oriented with like you said opportunities, new business, or is there other? Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying there?
I think I would try to just put out information that I find valuable the moment that it happens. So things that I usually maybe would put on my story. If I'm like, oh, this is a cool idea I have around my thoughts on rest pause or my thoughts on 3 times a week full body or whatever. Like anytime I just have a thought, instead of putting it on my story, maybe I just put that on as a post or a quick reel on the main page and just see if that changes engagement or provides more opportunity for growth or any of these things. Because if you look at my page, I've been on Instagram for, I don't know, 12 years at this point, maybe probably longer, 13 years. And I have under 400 total posts because I'm on a cadence of posting like once a month. When I feel like there's like really big thing that I want to talk about, I put it as a post, but otherwise it's always a story. But the success that I see of other people is it seems to be posting more often. And even in the case of JPG on Instagram, he's got like 500,000 followers or something, but he oftentimes will literally just post a set of him doing a movement and be like, notice what I'm doing with my wrist here on this lateral raise. And then in the caption, it's just like, follow my programs on Train Heroic. And it's like a link to his programs. And it's literally like a 10-second post. It must take him no time to put together. But like, if that engages people and they see that he has this program that he offers and he's able to draw people to it because of that, then there might be some value in that.
Yeah. So again, just again, potentially drumming up business and things like that. Right? We got to make a living.
Yeah, 100%. But also you have to take care of your mental health. And so there's the both sides of the equation.
Dude, no, and for like my personal side of things, it's like for me, I do enjoy learning things, and then I same as you, I want to put those things out. But I feel like it's tough for what I do because it's like I like to put those things out, but at the same time, I do like ultimately want to get. I want to work with people, right? I'd be lying if I said that wasn't one of the main reasons why. But I do enjoy posting, so it's finding that balance of like, I do like posting the more education stuff, but sometimes I feel like that's not always going to be the thing that's going to drive like, new kind of business. So it's finding that happy medium there. But I will say from a mental health perspective, dude, I at least lately I've been finding myself getting more like frustrated with like stuff like that lately, and like I could see where definitely have to be careful with social media when it comes to your mental health and like understand what's going on. Otherwise, I could see where it can lead to some issues. And then also, like, I don't do this, but like you said, the political side of things, like people getting super worked up over that stuff too, and that's tough as well.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes me feel like our country is being torn apart as both sides completely despise the other side. It seems at the extremes. And it's actually like my sense is 80 or 90% of the country actually exists like slightly left or slightly right.
Right?
And
Yep.
most of them want to get along and figure out a way to make it work. But the extreme, like 5% on either end that just can't stand each other, are somehow dragging the rest of that side into the mud with them. And it's just really bad messaging. Like our country has a PR problem.
And that's what's ultimately gonna drive social media, I feel like, right? Or the outliers on what
Yeah.
even in fitness too, right? It's like those are gonna be the ones that really drive like the content, unfortunately. And then people think that is the norm, and that's where we can run into some issues out
Yeah.
there. Give me an update on training. What have you been working on? What does that kind of look like at the moment?
Yeah, for a long time now, I feel like I've been on a just really consistent, doable, repetitive pattern of 3 lifting days and 3 cardio days with a fourth cardio day that's either like a zone 2 or I just do a bunch of steps. I really do try to move major way all days, no matter what. So even on a day that might be considered a rest day, I'll be like, cool, I'm gonna go do 15 or 20,000 steps or go for a hike or something like that. So the lifting has just been lower, upper, lower. 3 days a week, and then the next week is upper, lower, upper. So I just alternate upper, lower sessions, and between each of those is a cardio session. And in most cases, it's a zone 2 session just because that feels great and I enjoy them and they don't impact my recovery, or at least very minimally. And then once a week or so, I'll go do something harder. And I don't really put too many restrictions around what it is. I just more or less want to spend between 20 and 40 minutes with my heart rate in a combination of zone 4 and zone 5. And if I'm doing running, I'll usually go more toward that 20-minute time frame of time in zone for zone 4 and zone 5. And if I'm biking, I'll go for more for like 40 minutes of that time in zone. And that's pretty much the way it's been. It's on autopilot and it's so good. I have been prescribing this to a bunch of people and talked about it on my podcast a couple episodes ago. And the response that people have had since beginning to implement this structure has been really solid as far as just managing recovery, but also ensuring that you're getting like good results and stuff like
When you say like the whole thing, or just the weight training side of things,
the
or
whole implementation. Like, it doesn't have to be upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, lower type thing. It doesn't have to do that. But I think the idea of it being 3 days a week of lifting with some frequency that makes sense per muscle group. So it's probably not like a bro split 3 days a week. And then with the 3 cardio sessions in between with a fourth optional cardio session. If I want to do a zone 2 and it's a beautiful day out, I will. If I just want to go like for a hike, if I want to go for a long walk, listen to a 3 hour podcast or something. Sometimes I'll do that. Like just be like, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna listen to this 3 hour Lex Friedman episode, and I'm not coming home until it's done. And at the end, I'm like, wow, I learned so much about Nazi Germany and the drug culture there, and it's amazing. And then that's just what it is some days. But I do try to move in some way every single day, alternating between some sort of cardiovascular and then weight training on the alternating days.
so you said your cardio three, like basically it's every other day outside of lifting, and then like one day a week it might be like instead of an actual quote unquote cardio session, it might be like a hike or something like that. Just you're staying active for that fourth day, essentially.
Yeah.
Then within your cardio, what are your kind of goals? So you said that you're looking at heart rate. Like, what do you have a way of knowing if you're progressing? Like, what are you paying attention to there, or is it just, hey, I just want to go do the thing, and that to me, that's the most important thing for me.
Yeah, I think it's the latter more at this point. I'm more looking not to regress than I am looking to progress. And that is really just a matter of realizing that since I'm biking outside and winds matter and the elevation or lack of elevation matters as far as assessing the time that it took me to do a given ride or something like that.
Or even heart rate?
So I more just try to target my heart rate, and I assume that if I'm doing my heart rate where it's supposed to be, and my respiratory rate, like especially for zone two, that's been the number one thing I've been focusing on is actually respiratory rate now, because I find that you have to stay under 15 breaths a minute to really be in zone two. If you start getting above that, where you can't hold that 2 second inhale, 2 second exhale pattern, then you're probably getting up into like higher zones. So I will initially look at heart rate and then I'll check my respiratory rate as I'm biking or running or whatever. I do not tend to run in zone two much because I am running at such a slow cadence that it feels like it's actually more like shuffling than it is like running. So I tend to like to do my high intensity interval work, the VO2 max stuff while I'm running because it's so much easier to get to VO2 max anyways. And then I do my zone two stuff biking, which I super enjoy and just relax and chill into the moment.
How you because you and I had this discussion. How many hours do you feel like you're doing the kind of zone two stuff a week?
So the complicated part in answering that question is that I honestly believe that to bike effectively for zone two, you need about double the amount of time that you need to run effectively for zone two. So because of that, I'm biking 90 minutes or more on each of my zone two sessions. And thus, if I'm hitting two of those a week with one interval run, I'm biking at least 3 hours, maybe four, and then I'm doing an interval run, and then I have another zone 2 day or that hike or walk. So I'm either doing like 20,000 steps or I'm doing another like 90-minute bike ride.
Gotcha, gotcha. On your runs and interval, like the VO2 max stuff, what does that kind of setup look like?
I almost always start with at least 1 mile steady state, which is like a zone, it turns into zone three because I'm not really looking at my heart rate. I'm just kind of running at a comfortable pace. And I do that because A, it helps acclimate my heart rate to the workload that's coming ahead, but it also acclimates my connective tissues. And because I run in zeros, I just always have a very slight amount of Achilles, maybe it's tendonitis or something, but just a very small amount of noticeable something in my Achilles. And so I always do some like eccentric loaded calf raises to a deficit before I run. And then I do that 1 mile steady as a way of just warming up and loosening everything up. So I'm not going into that hard, powerful push against the ground immediately. And then after that first mile, I have a variety of protocols that I like, but I would say my most consistent one is 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And I run those minute ons in what would probably be like my all out mile pace. Like if I were to do a mile as hard as I possibly could, that's about the pace that I run those minutes at. And then I'll briskly walk in between. And that's my favorite one because I find it the easiest. Sometimes if I'm feeling up for it, I'll do 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. So it'll increase the time in aerobic zones, but the actual output is going to be slightly slower than it would be if I was doing the minute on, minute offs. And then I'll do 40/20s or 30/30s. Recently, I've been every other session throwing in some that are anaerobic. So anything that is equal work to rest would be considered aerobic. So like minute on, minute off type stuff. Even more aerobic if you go 2 minutes on, 1 minute off because the work time is even longer. So I'll throw in some anaerobic stuff where the work time is shorter than the rest time, but that I'm really hitting the pavement hard. And these are usually done on hills where I can just like book it for 20 to 30 seconds and then take 1 to 3 minutes of recovery, depending on how hard I push. If you do an all out hill sprint as hard as you can for 20 seconds, you will need 3 minutes of recovery. But if you're jogging the hill, then you might only need 1 minute of recovery. And so the output dictates the rest in that situation. But either way, I like some of that kind of high impact, powerful anaerobic work just because it is slightly different than weight training. It falls more into similar energy system as weight training does, like a hard set of hack squats, similar anaerobic output, but the turnover of the aerobic, I mean, of the running or the biking or the rowing or whatever it is, there's something about that is different than lifting weights. And so I think it's important to at least occasionally do stuff like that as well.
Is so with that too, like how often would you like do that, right? Because is that something that you feel like degrades pretty quickly if you don't do it, or is it like something that you can spread it out and do a little, and it's like you're going to maintain with that, or
I think the all out maximal effort stuff probably does go away faster. And I'm not actually doing that. Like, very rarely am I seeing there's a hill. I'm going to go as hard as humanly possible until I slow down. Like, that would literally be 10 seconds, maybe 12 seconds. Like, what humans can do at 100% effort is not very long. Anything longer than 12 seconds, we're inherently sandbagging a little bit or saving something. So no, I don't often do 100% all out type stuff like that. I would say it probably happens twice in the last year. I did it once on an assault bike where I did 5 intervals of 12 seconds as hard as I could go. And that just was so awful. I think that you could only do 60 seconds of total work, 12 seconds at a time. And it could be that bad is crazy, but I'm telling you, it can happen. So I did that once. And then I did sprint hills once. And so those were the two times. But usually when I'm doing it, it's a more repetitive, sustainable anaerobic interval. So think like I'm running 30 seconds on, minute or minute and a half off, but those 30 seconds on are at faster than my mile pace. It's not like an all out as hard as I could go for 30 seconds, but it's say 90 to 95% of that.
and you're doing that how often? That 90-95%?
I would say twice a month, probably.
Okay. And is that just again based off of how you feel, or are you just trying to maintain that adaptation?
I'd say a little bit of both, but when I do it is more about like how I feel. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I know that I want to get a stimulus to my aerobic system, but I A don't have as much time, or B I don't have the mental capacity to think about doing like a 45-minute harder, longer aerobic interval work. So it's easy for me to say I'm going to do 5 to 10 intervals and be done in under 20 minutes and get an effective workout than it is to do a longer one. And then sometimes, alternatively, sometimes I'll do them at the end of my aerobic work. So I'll finish like a 30 or 40-minute run. And then at the end, I'll do 5 or 10 of those intervals as well. So a variety of use cases there.
How would you like program that in for clients? Like that be something that you would like to include in, or some of these kind of higher end type stuff from time to time, or is it like not worth like to my understanding, that's going to be like the most efficient way to improve your VO2 max. But as we've talked about, that also like you can see quicker gains with that, but it's like you'll also tap out like a lot sooner and like plateau
Well,
out.
yeah, you actually wouldn't increase VO2 max as much with that protocol because it's anaerobic, because the rest times are longer
Mm,
than the work times. So anytime any of those protocols to increase VO2 max are going to have to be at least a 1-to-1
gotcha.
ratio of work to rest or slightly more work. So you could do like the most popular one is the 4-4-4, right? So 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. The Norwegian
Four
study
by
or
four.
whatever that they
Yep.
did, Norwegian protocol. A 5x5 is also super popular. 7x3, 8x3, something like that. Like they all get you into that zone of like 20-ish minutes of time in zone with a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So yeah, those are super effective. They are just so painful. Like when you start getting into that 1-to-1 work to rest ratio with those like 3 to 5 minute interval lengths, they're just so painful. And so what I'm talking about is like a day where my goal isn't to increase VO2 max, is simply just to get a really good workout in and spike the heart rate and get an adaptation without necessarily having to feel all the feels that come along with doing VO2 max work. Because I find you and I both love weightlifting. It's much easier to tell me that I can do 7 sets of 30 seconds on, 2 minutes off, where I'm just working really hard for 30 seconds, but then I get to rest for 2 minutes. That's the best. I can do that shit any day. So it's easy for me to bring my rower upstairs, sit in front of the football game, and be like, this Sunday, what I'm doing is I'm doing this really quick interval workout that's going to take under 20 minutes.
In my experience too, like when we were doing those 40-20s, 30-30s, like they got challenging, but they felt a little, I enjoyed doing those a little bit more than like the 2, 3, 4 minute intervals. Cause like those are just freaking hard. Cause it's like by minute, like a minute in, you're like, fuck, I still got 2 minutes of this
Yeah.
there. So I always found those to be a little bit better. Now, again, those 40-20s, those are that because of the work to rest ratio, those are technically aerobic development. Like that would be
Correct.
VO2 max type training, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think like the official VO2 max training protocol is usually a 1-to-1 work to rest. So 40-20s would hedge a little bit to the side of being a little more aerobic, but they absolutely still have the VO2 max built into them too. If you think about the Tabata study, that was done as 2010s. And so a 40-20 is just double of a 2010. It's the same work to rest ratio there. And that improved VO2 max significantly, at least in beginners.
Do you think like something like a 2010 versus 420 would be tougher, or is it all just tough in its own way? It's like obviously the 2010s you're like going all out for a shorter amount of time, but yeah, I don't know. What do you find to be a little bit tougher?
Either way, I think if you were to use some sort of machine that would be able to tell you either how far you went or what your output was or something like that, you would find the same output between 40-20s and 2010s and 60-30s and 90-45s. So I think the work to rest ratio dictates your output. And so just because it's a 2010 doesn't mean that you're going to be sprinting because it's only 20 seconds of work. But if it was a 90-45, you'd be pacing it out because it's 90 seconds. I really think that, but due to what the rest period is, that's going to dictate how much you can put into each of those intervals.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So like when you mentioned that for you, like you're not necessarily, it seems like with your cardio, you're just trying to not go backwards. So I guess like for you, how do you know that you're not going backwards? Are you just basing it off of what you can do? Are you doing any sort of testing or anything like that?
Yeah, so every summer when I am biking more than running, I have a few of these climbs that I do. One of them is NCAR. It's like 10 minutes long or so to get to the top. I think I've done it in 9:42 or something like that. Another one is Flagstaff, which is like 22-ish to 25 minutes to get to the top. I have another one that I do as well, Chapman, that's around 20 to 22 minutes to get to the top. I have a much longer one that I do that's about 45 to 50 minutes to get to the top, and it's literally just uphill the entire time. And then I have a few zone 2 routes that I really like to do every year. And these are like 2 hour long routes, but I make sure that my heart rate has to stay under 142 the entire time. And it's mostly flat. And so each year I do all of these things every summer and I compare my results year to year. And every year I've been getting like a little bit better. Obviously, in my first year or two, the improvements were significantly more drastic than they were in the subsequent years. But like this last year, I went from doing that first one in 10:03 to 9:42, I think, like something like that. Like I knocked 18 seconds or 20 seconds off of it. The Chapman one that was like 22 minutes, I think I did it 40 seconds faster this year than the prior year. So I'm getting these gains. They're slow, but they're there. And given that my goal is to just not backslide, I think that the protocols that I'm following are doing their job.
So you're just kind of basing it off of those your preset tests that you've had of, hey, this was my baseline here at this course, and now I'm just making sure that again from a time perspective, I'm able to get close to or at least beat it, at least by a little bit whenever you do that testing for that.
Yeah, for sure. And then also like, trying to get more efficient at my pedal stroke and like, all the other more cerebral sides of things that are outside of just how big is your engine. And so those are probably contributing at some small level as well.
Yeah, the efficiency, the economy of what you're doing is as well too.
Yeah, exactly. Getting better at shifting gears in the right places and stuff like
What
that.
what would you tell like your clients and stuff in terms of like, what would you tell people to pay attention to if they don't have these like certain kind of courses that they do? What would be some things that they should focus on to make
Well,
sure?
any cardio machine that you use has some way of tracking your output. So like your bike has your distance, right? So you can easily, or your average speed. What do you use? Average speed or
I
distance or
I do
both?
speed and then the resistance and then do like a set time.
Yeah, so you can easily calibrate those things to be consistent, and you could have a an FTP test where you're going 45 minutes for as far as possible on whatever resistance. And then you mark that down and you're like, okay, my FTP in 2025 was this. You can do the same thing with VO2 max intervals. You could do 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off for 5 rounds and then see your total distance achieved. Make sure you're obviously not pedaling during your 5 minute rest period. You could do 10 minutes all out for distance. Same thing if you have a rower, if you have a treadmill, if you any of these conditions, you can regulate the conditions session to session and make sure that you're being consistent and assess your progress that way. And so I do think there's value in testing, but I don't think that every cardio session you do in your season needs to be something that's focused on progressive overload. It's like we talk about with the philosophical approach to progressive overload for weights. Like you want to progress because you notice that the weights you're using are getting easier. And it's much like in cardio. Like you don't go in every time being like, Last time my VO2 max, I did 6.2 miles on this course. Now I need to do 6.4 or else it's a failure. I just wouldn't approach it that way, except during those periods of times where you're doing your testing. And then, yeah, those are your tests. And it's the same way in the way I program weightlifting cycles, where in week 6 or week 8, at the end of each cycle, we take things to zero RIR and we see if we're beating the last mesocycle. And I think that a lot of those same principles can apply here as well.
Yeah, so again, and this, like you said, it goes. This is something I never like. The progressive overload's pretty similar to like weight training, right? If you just think about it, it's basically it is the same thing there. And I always just differentiate the two, but it is relatively the same. So like you said, you're not necessarily trying to force progression, but again, over time, we want to see that progression somewhere in terms of, like you said, distance, like intensity that you can do at that time frame or whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I like that. Like you're not always going in trying to beat last week's numbers. You're just going in based off of how you're feeling for that week. And then you said do some sort of test at the end of a cycle and see where you're at from that perspective.
Yep.
With that too, like in terms, now that we're you talking about weight training in terms of progressive overload, what is that kind of how often do you feel like you go in and like beat your previous week's numbers there? Because we've had this conversation. I feel like I always get myself hung up on, like, still do try to beat, whether it be a rep or something, almost like I try, like sometimes I have to force myself, like, all right, you don't need to do that every single week, but like, how often do you feel like that happens for you and stuff like that?
Per the way that I design cycles, where I'm trying to increase proximity to or decrease proximity to failure week to week, I do feel like I'm adding a rep or adding some weight every single week until I reach a point where I can't do it anymore. And then I'll try again the next week. And then usually I'll be like, okay, let's back the weights off and rebuild back up and see if we can then beat where I was at the end of that prior mesocycles. Like one good example is you started conventional deadlifting again. And one of my days of deadlifting, I do heavy, where I build up to a heavy single. And the other day, I do 3x3 at like 75% of the single that I do. And so my goal each week is to increase the heavy deadlift day by 5 pounds. And then on the next week, increase the light deadlift day by 5 pounds because it's a percentage of the heavy deadlift day. But I'm starting the cycle with my deadlift single at something that would be like an RPE 6 or 7. And then every week when I add a little bit of weight, I can still do it, but it's a little bit harder. And then I can still do it and it's a little bit harder. And I've been doing this now for 8+ weeks. Maybe I'm at 10 weeks now since I reintroduced deadlifts back in. And it's been amazing. Like I'm still progressing back up. I've got my deadlift single up to probably like an RPE 9-ish right now. And my back offsets are still completely manageable and have been going up every week for the light deadlift week. And so I just honestly follow that same structure and pattern for every single movement that I have in my program. And when I reach the end of the point where I can't progress anymore, I just back things off and start back up again.
How long have you been finding that your mesocycle training cycles have been lately?
I'd say 6 to 8 weeks usually. It's been tough to say because I've also had some trips where I'd be forced to take 3 to 5 days away from weights and I just do like pull-ups and push-ups and some pistol squats or something like that. And so that almost acts as like a mini deload. So when I come back, I might back the weights off 1 week and then progress forward from there. So I would say if I was progressing strictly straight through, it would be 6 to 8 weeks. But because of the way summer has been with these trips and this time off, I'm on, like I said, I don't know, 8 or 10 weeks at this point, and I don't foresee myself stopping anytime in the next couple weeks, maybe in like 3 or 4 weeks.
Are you like changing a lot of exercises when you change those cycles, or are you just picking a few that you're changing out, or is anything changed with that?
I would say very rarely do I change much. Like maybe 20% of the stuff changes exercises, like things I'm just burnt out on or bored with. But most of the stuff just stays the same, and I just back my effort off. For if I was at failure on my chest supported T-bar row and then doing partials after failure, I'll just back it off to something that's 2 RIR and then just kind of build up over the next weeks.
Nice. What are some exercises that are new that you've really digging that you've added in, and then just I'm curious just to hear in general what exercises you have in.
Yeah, so the conventional deadlift is obviously one I haven't done in 5+ years, and so that's been cool to get back in because you and I have actually talked about this off air, but I tend to deadlift with a slightly flexed back, like slightly rounded. It's just always been that way, and it feels fine. So something I've never done before, but trying right now is deficit stiff-legged deadlifts where I do them with the same flexed back position that I use in my deadlift. So essentially trying to strengthen all of my spinal erectors to be stronger in that slightly rounded position. So I'm doing those after my light deadlift day. Can't do them after the heavy deadlift day because it's just too much on my back. And then I've been experimenting with a hybrid bent over row, upright row. So think of, yeah, it's a cool movement because an upright row is like lateral delts plus some of the scapular elevators, like the upper traps, mid traps, stuff like that. But when you bend over slightly, you're going to still get the lateral delts that you would get with the upright row, but you also are going to get some of the lower traps and more like of that rhomboid kind of scapula structure that's a little bit lower down the back. And it doesn't really impact your low back for stability the same way that it does if you're more bent over. So I thought that was cool. I've done it now for 2 weeks. Prior to this, I'd been doing high pulls, which I also really like. And so I'm including both of these in my programming now, where I'm going to the hang position where you would be like slightly bent over, but then using the power from the legs and the hips and the triple extension of the ankles and knees to accelerate the bar up into the high pull. And I've really missed being explosive and doing stuff like that since I stopped doing CrossFit now 8+ years ago. But that's been cool, reintroducing that. I've been experimenting with less range of motion on my chest pressing exercises. One of the guys that I've been communicating with in DM is super big on this idea of not letting the humerus go below parallel at the bottom of your chest presses, which actually is very small range of motion at the bottom. I'm used to going quite deep and really feeling the stretch. A lot of the rationale for that being that all it really does is put stress onto the front delts. It doesn't really leave it securely onto the chest, and it engages the rib cage in this weird manner that protrudes it and sucks in and collapses the chest a little bit. I don't quite go to the range of motion like to the point where my arm is completely parallel to the ground. I go a little bit lower than that, but I'm not letting it sink anymore into like deepest of positions. And I think overall it's actually positive. I think there's a little bit less stress on my shoulders, and my chest seems to still be getting the same amount of load and tension on it, at least from what I can tell. So that's been cool.
Have you been able to do like more weight? Did you have to add weight to for that?
No, actually, it's not any easier. It's almost as if that dead stop without using the elastic rebound effect in some ways makes it harder than it does when you can go down and get that stretch reflex from the bottom. So yeah, I would say the loading has been the same for me for literally the same amount of reps despite changing the range of motion.
That kind of reminds me of squats, right? Where, a lot of people say, oh, you want to just increase your range of motion. Again, it depends on what your goal is, right? Like you want to go ass to grass. But again, if you are trying to make it more of a quad-based movement, going too low obviously will take some tension off the quads at least a little bit, right? I'm assuming it probably depends on the person's body and everything like that. But I know Steve Hall was messing with that too, where he would
Mhm.
stop a little bit higher, put more tension on the quads. And for me, I'm someone that likes to do a full range of motion squat, and like stopping a little bit higher actually is like actually hard to do, and I feel like I almost
Yeah.
have to decrease the weight a little bit to be able to do that.
I'm fully with you. Yeah, I think the analogy is actually right on. And I agree that when you get to the bottom of the squat, it's primarily your adductors and glutes that help you get out of the hole. Your quads actually, it's like we talk about when you're pendulum squatting or whatever, you want to stop at the point
Yep.
where your knees stop going. And so it's the same way when you're back squatting. Like there will be a point where you reach maximum knee flexion, which can be enhanced by using a wedge or something like that. But there will be a point where you're at maximum knee flexion, and going any lower than that does, yes, if not take tension off the quads, does not add tension and allows other muscles to contribute. I think there's value in that, and I think the analogy is great.
With the presses, that's interesting you say that because I was telling you off air that my left shoulder's been bothering me a little bit, and so I've had to decrease the range of motion a little bit, especially on any of the cable pressing type stuff. I don't know if that
Mhm.
matters or if that's going to have even more of an impact on maybe what you were just talking about there, but I've definitely had to shorten that range of motion a bit instead of like in as much range of motion, like stop it a little bit more, and that seems to help a little bit and take some of that stress off the shoulder.
Yeah, and then it still seems to leave plenty of tension on the chest.
With the cables, is that going to be any different? Because I know obviously like the resistance curve and stuff like that's going to be a little bit different with cables versus the dumbbells and stuff. Would that have an impact, or do you think that the same concept would still apply there?
Yeah, I think the same applies. The only thing with cables to consider would be that just Yeah, well, actually, it's harder to consider it on a compound movement, but you talk about how when you're doing an isolation movement, like a single joint movement, the point where your arm is perpendicular to the cable is the point of most tension. The same doesn't apply to a multi-joint movement. So yeah, for cables, I don't think it would make a huge difference. Have you noticed that you've had to change the weights or the reps that you're getting with the change of range of motion?
It's a good question. I feel like if I did it, it was very small. I think I've gone a little bit lighter, but I feel like that was more kind of protecting the shoulder. But I'm talking maybe 5 to 10. It's not like it's been like 30 pounds, right? It's been like
Right,
maybe
right.
5% difference, if that.
Yeah, no.
With the high rows and the high pulls, you said you're doing both of those, or you're
I
doing.
usually will alternate weeks. It's actually not officially on my program, but due to having 26 years of experience, there's days where I want to get a workout in, but I don't want to do exactly what's on my program. And so some days I'll just be like, you know what? I don't feel like doing my dual cable lateral raise. I'm just going to do some high pulls or some upright row hybrid things.
What is the role of the upright row? Because I feel like that's an exercise that gets bashed a lot. Do you feel like it maybe is incorrectly bashed?
I think it really depends on your individual anthropometry and where your joint structures lie. There certainly are people that get impingement in their shoulders from doing it. I think for me, if I am doing it strict, there is a point where it's too high and it starts to feel weird. If I'm using momentum, then that momentum can carry me through the weird part and it's not that big of a deal. I also think that it matters to find and experiment with grip width because I would say that there's probably people that feel totally great doing it narrow but feel terrible doing it wide. And then there's probably other people, vice versa, that would do better wide than narrow or vice versa, whatever. I can't remember which one I said first. But yeah, I think that the upright row is not necessarily a movement that needs to be bashed universally. It should be experimented with. And then I think that there's still a ton of value in it if you don't get a full contraction or can't get all the way up. Like even if your upright row is just the bottom half of the movement and you're getting up to say your abdomen, you're actually doing the lengthened part of the movement. So you're probably getting plenty of stimulus at that bottom range anyway. So I don't know. I think anytime that you can abduct, move your arm out to the side, then you're going to get lateral delt, and that's what's happening in an upright row. And then the fact that you also get the finish at the top is going to engage the traps and your scapula elevators and stuff like that. So I think overall, there's definitely value in it if it feels fine for you and you can experiment with that.
If it doesn't feel good for you, mess with the grip width of it potentially. Like you said, if you're going a little bit more narrow,
Yeah. And the
or
range of motion, like how high you go.
how high you go to. You run into pain, like any sort of discomfort or anything, just stop that range of motion wherever you start to feel that essentially type.
Yeah, exactly. And see if you can get higher with a different grip width.
Would you say that same thing like with anything, doesn't matter? Have you found like a cable versus dumbbells versus like straight bars or barbells work better there with that movement?
I just don't really like barbells in general for things. For the high pulls, they're fine because of the momentum. But for strict upright rows, I don't like being locked in pronation. So I find that dumbbells allow you to go at almost what would be like a semi-pronated grip, which I think feels significantly more aligned with the natural path that you would want to take. And then cables are great too because you could use D handles. And the nice thing about cables is you can set it up in a manner where you get tension at the lengthen position, which you really don't have if you're using a dumbbell or a barbell. Like when you're at arm's length, it's like pulling on you a little bit, but like the weight's pretty light, so it's not really pulling on you like you would be if you were doing shrugs. There's not much tension down there, but the cable will allow you to get tension there. And then I also actually quite like the lying cable upright row,
You had me do that.
which yeah, I've been a huge fan of that and used that for years too. Maybe I'll actually incorporate that back in. It's been a while. So I do enjoy that one too.
Yeah, that felt good. I think I like that one a little bit better than the regular ones. In terms of cable height, like if you're standing up, just at the bottom is fine there to get that tension at the bottom, or do you need to?
Yeah, totally. I think that's great.
Okay. And then would this be something that could be like in replace of Y rays, or does it really just depend on your programming overall and everything like that?
Yeah, it does work a lot of the same muscles as the Y rays. You get the lateral delts, the rear delts, the different various traps and stuff like that. I think you probably get more of the lower traps with the Y rays based on the nature of the movement there because the upright row is going to stop. You're not actually going to abduct the arms and bring them as far back as you would in a Y raise. And so I think you're more going to be dealing with the upper scapula when you're doing the upright row, and you get a little bit more like thorough bashing of all the things when you go Y raise. But they definitely work similar muscle groups.
When you're like programming delt, because again, it sounds like both these exercises are going to have a huge delt component to it, right? See the side delts, rear delts.
Yeah.
When you're looking at developing delts in general, are these all movements that you're going to do a nice combination of Y raises with some upright rows with some lateral raises, or how would you typically go about that?
Yeah, I think over the course of your training journey, like you're gonna need to do all of them if you want thorough development. I think you need to choose one purely like abduction lateral raise. I really like the behind the back dual cable one, which is a nice contrast to the dual cable Y raise because when you're doing the one behind the back, it's coming slightly forward. So you're going to get the lateral delt section more on the anterior side on the front. And when you do your Y raise, it's coming from the front and going to the back. So you're going to get more of the rear delt, lateral delt side. So I think those two exercises together are uniquely conformed to be able to thoroughly provide the necessary stimulus to the delts. And then beyond those two, like you can fill in the gaps and do like some upright rows and stuff like that. But if you're doing a behind the back to forward and a front to back, like your lateral delt, rear delt, front delt is going to be mostly taken care of.
Is that how you typically do you have at least some sort of Y raise in a lateral, like in your programming, like for you specifically?
Yeah, if we're not doing a Y raise for any reason, then it would definitely have that kind of bent, slightly bent over upright row thing, or some like version of that with a cable, like maybe those lying upright rows or something along those lines. I usually just want one delt movement that has the arms in front of the body that kind of pulls back, and one that has them behind the body that kind of pulls forward.
So this might would a regular dumbbell lateral raise do that or not? It's not going to because it's not going behind the back like that.
Yeah, I would say it's not quite doing the same thing. I think it probably is doing enough of it, though. We have that study that compared the cable lateral raises to the dumbbell, and they found equal growth, undetectable differences between the two groups. Non-significant, I guess would be the word. And we know that when most people do their dumbbell lateral raises, they don't do them directly to the side. You're usually getting a slight kind of scapular plane movement where it's coming slightly forward of directly lateral. So in that case, you're still getting a little bit of that front delt. Don't think it's really a big deal if you decide to do them with dumbbells instead.
So biggest reason I asked too is just because like this training cycle, like I just can't remember if I kept in behind the back. I feel like I don't know if I did or not, but I just was like, all right, I had done Y raises for so freaking long. I like them. I think they're great exercise. But I was like, I got to take a break from these. And I feel really with those, you're limited to either you just do them standing with the cables or you do it lying, right? Like you're not
Yeah.
really. I guess you could do dumbbells, but
Yeah, I do them face down on an incline bench with dumbbells, and I actually quite like that as well.
that's tough. I've done them. Those suck because they're just like freaking hard. Like you're like
The
literally
short position kills you.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like you're grabbing like 10-pound dumbbells and you're just like, the
Yeah.
hell am I doing here? So I just was like, all right, I just wanted to, but it sounds like there's probably nothing wrong with, hey, if you do something like Y raises for say 6 months to a year at a time, it's like, hey, if you take a couple cycles off of it, replace it with some other type of delt stuff, it's like you're probably not missing anything. You just eventually want to go back to getting in some Y raises again at
Yeah,
your
yeah.
programming.
And actually, I'll add another one into the mix that's similar that can replace the Y raise a little bit is a face pull. And
Mm.
I actually really prefer to do these with dumbbells over an incline bench. So you would
Oh,
set up
wow.
like you're doing a chest supported row, but then when you grab your dumbbells, instead of pulling them to your shoulders or your hips or whatever, you would literally let your elbows abduct and you would be hunched over the incline bench and pulling them to your face, and you get a lot lateral delt, rear delt, all the traps. Like you get all that good stuff there too. So I'm a big fan of that one.
So you would prefer that over doing the cable version of that?
I don't like the cable because it's unstable. If you use enough weight on a cable,
True.
it's like if you're strong on a cable, you need a chest support. So if you could set up a cable face pull with a chest support, then I think that would be probably better than dumbbells or at least equally as good. It would be like a cable row to a dumbbell row. Like both are fine, just kind of preference based.
Yeah. Anything else like in terms of the delts that you would add in or like any other kind of like thoughts on like any kind of like training tips or anything from a delt perspective that you either try to implement or anything like that or that people
I
just
think,
go ahead.
yeah, number one tip would just be to remember that when you're doing any sort of lateral raise or Y raise, you want to think specifically lateral raise. You want to think about pushing out, not lifting up. And I think just that even that very subtle thought process reminder when you're doing your lateral raises to not think about, okay, I need to lift the weight up to here, but instead I need to push the weight out. And as you push the weight out, it inevitably goes up because that's what your arm does. But changing that thought process really seems to help.
Thinking like dragging your kind of like knuckles on the floor almost in a way versus like there's a lot of people
Yeah,
would do
totally. I love that. Yeah, drag the
like
knuckles on the floor. Yeah.
because probably what happen a lot is people just focus on getting the weight up and then they what maybe start to like use their traps a bit more potentially. Is that kind of what
Yeah, for sure, for
happened
sure.
there?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
With in terms of like frequency, I feel like this is a muscle group that you could probably, if you wanted to, for a period of time, really camp up that frequency on it. Do you find that, or is that kind of a myth there? Or what do you think with that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I also think that it's one that you could completely ignore and barely ever train, and you probably wouldn't notice like a ton of loss simply because it's going to be trained through other movements that you're doing at some level. Like even doing rowing movements is going to train the rear part of the lateral delt. So like you probably could get away with barely doing any lateral delt work or just doing overhead presses and would maybe notice no difference. So yes, you absolutely, because it recovers fast, and especially on these abduction kind of lateral raise, Y raise movements that are mostly short overloaded, they recover really quickly. You could probably do them 3 to 5 days a week, and maybe you would notice some increases there. Maybe you wouldn't, but you also could not do it and probably not notice a huge ton of losses. Like I certainly went through periods, I'll reflect on my CrossFit experience where I was doing a bunch of like handstand push-ups and pull-ups and rows and things like that, but I don't think I did a lateral raise for 10 years and my lateral delts were totally fine. So like I sometimes think it's overblown with how much you actually need to do, even though you can, which kind of makes it complicated as well because it's like could do 30 sets a week of this. And it's like, sure, like you definitely could. You could spend an hour training your lateral delts if you really want to, but you don't have to.
It reminds me of, and it's fun. This is the same muscle group, but like for example, rear delts, essentially, right? Where it's, I remember like it's, oh, you got to do some sort of movement to hit your rear delts, but it's like they probably get hit a ton in any sort of rowing that you're doing, right? So it's like you don't necessarily need to do a ton of direct work there if it's not like a muscle group that you necessarily like really want to bring up or something like that, right? So
Yeah, and I went to N1 and did the EMG, and then we did the Oxy things. I forget what they're called, where you put the two different types of things on my body, and we did all these movements. And even the ones that were showing the most lat activation, so think of like your neutral grip, elbows drive down into the waistline, pull down. It showed the highest activation of lats among the movements we compared, but its highest individual activating muscle was still the rear delts. So it's like no matter what pulling movement you do, the rear delts are going to be the primary mover regardless. So I would just keep that in
which
mind.
again is like, and you probably don't really need that much direct. Like it's again from a cost and like time standpoint, it's like you probably don't need, like if you're doing rowing and stuff like that, you're getting plenty of rear delt in there. That's one thing that I know I've changed in my programming. Like this was probably years ago. I just was like, oh, you gotta do like the reverse pec deck or anything like that. And it's like, oh man, they do really get hit a lot there.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on Hatfield squats?
Oh, the ones where you're holding the rack. Yeah, I use them. I used them all the time with my safety bar. I actually preferred them as Hatfield rear foot elevated split squats. So I would use my safety squat bar on my
Gotcha.
back, and then I would have a rear foot elevation on a bench, and I would hold onto the rack for support. So I was almost making it into like a Smith machine, so to speak. And yeah, dude, I'm a huge fan. I haven't actually done them as proper Hatfield squats where I'm actually doing a squat and holding onto the rack, but using them for that version for rear foot elevated was premier. It was great.
What would you like in terms of if I were to, because this is, would you say when you're looking at a stimulus, this is hard to say, but if I wanted to do this at home, you think that would be a nice kind of sub for like a hack squat or something like that versus just doing like a regular back squat?
Yeah, I would say it's probably more similar to a regular back squat than it is to a hack squat, but I think that the safety squat bar is pretty versatile and it can be used for a few different things. Like you can do good mornings with it. You can do the Hatfield squats with it. You can use it for the split squats. You can do lunges with it. I've enjoyed it. It's probably not used as often as many other things in my gym, but it's a cool thing to have.
Yeah, yeah. I've always liked the safety bar squat, but I haven't really used it in so long. And then we may have talked about this, but I was like, when you use wedges, will that kind of decrease the amount of weight that you can do, or is it is
Mhm.
in terms of squats, or is that gonna does that matter?
Yeah, it will because it makes the movement more knee dominant. It takes away or it decreases the ability of the glutes and in some cases the adductors to assist the movement. So yeah, it will be less weight.
Because I've been noticing this. I've been doing the heel elevated back squats. Part of it obviously is I hadn't used a barbell in years, and then I hadn't done a back squat in a long time. So I knew there was going to be this like, hey, you're obviously not going to be doing what you were doing before. I never necessarily had a heavy back squat by any means, but I've been like I've been going up, but man, I'm like, dude, this is freaking hard at like 225. I'm like, this isn't. It's like, what the hell's going on? But makes sense. Like it is, you're just using more quad. I already feel like I have a fairly quad dominant squat in general, the way I squat, and so I'm assuming that's going to make it even more so, like where you're just not going to be able to do as much if you could use, like you said, your glutes and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And then if you're doing the Steve Hall thing and you're not going all the way down, then you're even eliminating them even more.
Yeah. That makes me feel a little bit better about them there. But like I said, part of it's just the skill side of things too. I knew it was just going to take a while there with that. So I was curious, do you take any electrolytes or anything like that? I know it's a random question, but do you do electrolytes?
Yeah, I take Element usually twice a day, once in the morning when I wake up, not right when I wake up, but about an hour later. And then another time with whatever workout I'm doing for the day. If I'm lifting or biking or whatever, I'll usually have one then. And I put 5 grams of creatine in each one. So I take 10 grams of creatine a day as well.
Have you always done 10 grams of creatine, or did you recently up it a little bit?
Yeah, more in the last year since the studies on the cognition side of it came out that showed that 5 grams is good for the muscles, but you need 10 for the brain.
Yeah. It's interesting because they even show that like, you might even need more than that, but it's probably one of
Yeah.
those things where if you just consistently take 10, is that going to lead to the same thing? And plus, at the end of the day, it's not like it's necessarily super expensive. And you would imagine that there could potentially be some, if you're a bigger person, there could be some benefit from even just a muscle standpoint of taking a bit more anyway. So have you noticed a difference by taking 10?
What, am I smarter? No, I have no idea. The other day I experimented for the first time with the other research on creatine, which is that if you have a night out partying and you don't really sleep much, that you could take a massive like 20-gram dose of creatine and it could mitigate some of the negative aspects of poor sleep. So I did that this weekend. I woke up early after barely sleeping on Sunday morning and had to take my son to his football practice at 8 a.m. And I downed 20 grams of creatine. And I don't know if it was placebo or if I was just like still feeling it from the night out or whatever, but I was at the football practice and just like vibing with the dads and like amped about the game and feeling super good. And so I don't know, like maybe I'll try creatine again next time and see what happens.
I was gonna say, yeah, it'd be interesting to see now if you do that again. So it's kind of short. Yeah, if you have a bad night of poor sleep, you could increase it for that one day, like
Yeah.
that up to 20 and see some benefits there. Did you, from a GI standpoint, did you notice anything taking 20 at one time?
It's tough to say if I did notice something, but I don't know if it was from that or if it was simply from
And
the night out, like
yeah,
being out, putting bad shit into my body, like whatever. Yeah, tough to
or
say,
combo.
but I haven't been hugely affected by creatine taking 10 grams a day. That hasn't seemed to affect my GI at all. So I would doubt that it was the creatine, but who knows?
Could have been like a combination too, right? It's probably
Yeah.
never just like one thing. But I know when I first started taking 10, the first couple nights, it just felt like a little bit more like bloated and gassy, like right after. But that like, went away fairly quickly after that. So I haven't noticed really any issues since then. From a like nutrition standpoint and stuff, are you working on anything specific there? Or is it just fueling your body to for performance and making sure you're just feeling good?
Yeah, mostly the latter. I'm still like flirting with this idea of wanting to make my walking around body weight like in the low 180s. I haven't made any moves to make that happen. I'm still in the mid 190s, but if I do that, I am going to have to just sacrifice muscle in the process because I can't just like maintain 8% body fat all the time. So if I want to do that, I do have to expect that I'm going to be at a similar body fat that I am now and just be less. So I don't know. We'll see if I end up deciding to do that, but it hasn't started yet.
What would be your rationale for one or the other?
Just that
Well,
it would be easier to exist in the world as a smaller human. It's just potentially better sleep, like less food needed, which also could be a negative. I love food, so maybe it's a negative to need less food. Just like healthier long term. Like I have plenty of muscle, and not that I think I have enough weight that I would be considered at risk of being too heavy or my BMI being too much or whatever, even though my BMI is high. It just, I think as I get older, I just don't need as much muscle as I have. And I think that all functions of the human body are just gonna function better and less stress on my organs and all that stuff just as a smaller human.
I wonder if you could get away. Like, I'd be curious to know what your body. I wonder if you could like, get away with just a little bit higher body weight, just see, and then obviously if you want to keep pushing it down there, right, to where you wouldn't have. Because obviously, best case scenario is you could be a little bit leaner without sacrificing any muscle, right? You'd be
That'd
able
be
to
great. Yeah.
a little bit of a lower body weight. Because we've talked about this before, but it seems like when you cut and you just kind of decrease your caloric intake for a little bit, you just lose kind of some of that. Even though you don't necessarily feel bloated, you just kind of lose a little bit of that, right? Like it's almost like at least 3 to 5 pounds. And then obviously as you're bigger, it's like more potentially right off the bat. So I wonder what that would look like for you. So right now you're just kind of the thought process of it. And that's not anything necessarily that you're going to do for sure.
Yeah, at some point I'm gonna start eating less. Just don't know how far I'm gonna take it. Like you said, like maybe I'll just get down to 5 or 7 pounds less than I am now, and maybe that will be sufficient and I'll feel better there. It's not even like I don't feel good. I just know that most things in my life would probably be slightly improved simply by just weighing less. And I'm also like, I've existed in this size of being like a 200-pound guy for a long time that it seems pretty normal. But my family are not big people. Like my dad is 5'6", 150,
Oh, well.
and my mom is like 5'3", 120. Like not big people. My brother is 5'8", 160. So he's like a little bigger, but still, I don't know. I just feel as if maybe being 200 pounds or 197 or whatever I am is just not necessarily where I should be in the second half of my life.
Yeah. I could tell you I messed around with this too, where I just wanted to see if I could hang out at a little bit of a lower body weight. Again, I'm even like I'm in the I'm in the 150, so I don't necessarily think my weight, but I'm also 5'6", 5'7", so it's obviously your goes with your height and stuff like that in terms
Yeah.
of body weight. But I just wanted to test out because I haven't literally been like anytime I've dieted, I've gotten into the 150s and then I like quickly got out of the 150s. So I wanted to mess around with like, all right, what would it look like to stick around in the 150s a bit more? Is
And
it going
how's
to
it
make me?
been?
I just recently stopped trying to be in a deficit. And so now I think this will be the big kind of part of the experiment of like, how am I going to feel now? I've told you, like and again, this is probably just from doing cardio, but that feels way better. Like I feel like when I go play hockey, like I'm like, I feel like I'm at this balance now of like weight with eating enough is like the perfect balance of like the right muscle to like body weight kind of ratio or strength to
Hmm.
body weight ratio. I'm feeling enough. And so I feel like super fast out there, but still strong and stuff. So I feel like it's good. And I still feel like I look like I just feel like I look a bit like leaner and just, yeah, just more of that kind of look versus like more of a bulkier type look when I was trying to get to say like 165, 170 plus basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I'm saying. Like just moving through life is easier. And then, especially in the winter, since I'm picking up running again and I'm not gonna be able to bike, the impact on my body, like I talked about my Achilles in the beginning, like all of that would just feel so much better if I weighed 20 pounds or 15 pounds less. It'll probably happen at some point.
Then even like resting heart rate, I don't know, like to me, like when I'm in the 160s, like I do find, and again, there's probably some things I could potentially do to continuing to improve my cardiovascular. But again, it's kind of that thing where it's like, can you maintain a higher body weight and continue to improve your card? Like, is there going to be a point where you can't really improve it anymore at a certain, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, you do need to probably get a little bit leaner. But like resting heart rate, for example, tends to be a little bit like in the like high 40s, lower 50s when I'm like in a phase where I'm pushing closer to 165 too. Where it's like, but I like that's like high 40s, low 50s is still overall like a solid number, but it's just like I want to test it out and just see essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And that, again, that's almost a sign of the load on your body. If your heart rate is at base level higher than it is at a lower body weight, then that's more times your heart has to beat over the course of the day, the week, the month, the year, and the rest of your life. And so, yeah, being smaller and less taxing on your body is probably a good thing in the latter years, or latter years, as if I'm like moving toward
We're
death. But
like,
yes, yeah, in the second half of life.
yeah, I don't know. I'm just not, obviously, like I said, like I want to continue to build muscle, but I guess it's a little bit different that I don't necessarily feel like I need to get up to like getting to 170 and 180 being lean. I just feel like that's not going to be anything that I'll be able to attain unless I did some
Right.
sort of PDs or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, just trying to work with like what I have going on now. And as we've talked about too, like I'm just super interested in the conditioning cardio stuff. I just really
Yeah.
enjoy doing that. And it's fun now to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you alluded to, losing body weight automatically increases your VO2 max since it's a calculation against your body weight. So I could literally just stay as fit as I am now, not even get fitter, and my VO2 max goes up just simply by losing weight, which is cool.
Yep. Yep. Cool, man. Anything else that like you've been like interested in or anything that we didn't go over today or anything like that?
No, I can't think off the top of my head. I think we covered a bunch of different topics.
Any like fitness information that's come out in the last couple months that you're like, oh, that's pretty interesting, or any studies or anything like that you've had your eye on? It's fine if you don't. I just didn't know if there's been anything that's
I'm
kind of
just
freaked you.
keenly following all of the Beardsley, Jake Dolishall drama and just really enjoying seeing different perspectives on things. And while I don't fully agree with all the things they're saying, like a lot of it makes sense at a basic mechanistic level. And so it has me intrigued. Like anecdotally, there's just been too many jacked people that have done so without training in this way that apparently we all should be training in. So I'm not in a fear factor situation. Like a lot of people that DM me are scared. They're like, "Oh, if I'm not training this way, I'm not getting results." Like, no, you not training full body 3 times a week is not why you're not getting results. There's plenty of reasons why you're not getting results. But once you have everything dialed in and you're chasing the end, like this might help you get to the next phase if it's practical and fits in with your life and all of that. And so I've just been enjoying following that and having an open mind, not trying to just immediately close my mind to everything, but also enjoying kind of some of the drama that's occurred around it among some of the other influencers and just watching all of that.
I feel like
And
his kind of way of it's how to minimize fatigue as much as you can, essentially. Like I feel like that is the basis of like his kind of.
yeah.
You feel that way too, or am I like?
Yeah, no, it is. It's maximizing stimulus under the idea that the first set is the one that produces the most stimulus. So why would you not want to have as many first sets as you can? So I think that's one factor of it. I do think a lot of it is about mitigating fatigue or at least managing fatigue. But then on the other side, like you have him saying things like, once you add in an exercise, you can never take it out because then those muscle fibers that exercise trains are going to atrophy. And so you start with this bland program that's just like one exercise per muscle group. And then you add in a second exercise per muscle group. And then you have to cut the total number of sets you're doing. So say you were doing 4 sets of overhead press, but then you add in lateral raises. Now you're doing 2 sets of overhead press and 2 sets of lateral raises. Okay, now you decide you want to work some rear delts. So you add in some Y raises. Now you're doing 2 sets of overhead press, 1 set of lateral raise, and 1 set of Y raise. And so essentially every time that you're adding in a new exercise, you take some sets away from the other exercise for the similar muscle group, spread it out across more exercises. Now you're more thoroughly training the body. You're getting more first sets. And then you have to do this at a frequency that means that your muscles aren't going to atrophy, which means you have to hit each of these regions every 48 to 72 hours or whatever it is. And so the whole thing is built around a lot of fear. In like, if you're not doing this, your muscles are going to atrophy. If you're not keeping in exercises, you're going to atrophy. If you're not training every 72 hours, you're going to atrophy. There's all of this scare tactic around if you don't do this, you're going to atrophy and you're going to lose muscle. And that's the part I push back against is simply that I don't believe that to be true because there's just too many people that are natural that have trained in so many varieties of manner. And it doesn't seem reasonable to be like, well, these guys would have gotten better results if they had done it this other way. Like maybe that's true, but it's not proven. So I'm both aware and intrigued by what they're doing, but also keeping on my skeptical cap as well.
Yeah, because it's like, and to go back to the scare part of it, it's like you had to be worried about that. Then a lot of people wouldn't have really any amount of muscle if that were the case, and that's obviously not. So it's like you said, a lot of different things can work, but is this something that could potentially work better for you? This is
Yeah.
something to look into.
Yeah, for me, it's like the monotony piece that really turns me off from it because the idea that you have to hit not just the same muscle group every 72 hours, because I think that's actually reasonable. I think you could easily design a program that has you doing like overhead press one day, lateral raises another day, and Y raises another day. And you're like, cool, I'm hitting my whole delt structure over a week. I'm doing great. But then these guys come in, they're like, oh no, hold your horses, young man. You are missing out on training muscle fibers on each of those days. The overhead press does not train the same muscle fibers as the lateral raise, which does not train the same muscle fibers as the Y raise. And thus, you are atrophying these regions throughout the entire week. And I'm like, that's the part I struggle with because, like, yes, I guess logically that sort of makes sense, but this just isn't what we've seen. Like, people don't design programs doing the exact same exercises every session. That's just not what people do, and people are still getting jacked.
So it's almost like, hey, every session is basically the same. You're doing the same exercises every single session, essentially.
Correct. Yes, because you can't let them
That's
atrophy.
crazy. Yeah, that's insane. Then it just comes, then a lot of people wouldn't train, I feel, eventually, or people's like training would, like you said, be super monotonous, and now they're not going to put as much into it as well. And you got to, I do think sometimes that stuff misses that aspect of it. And I do feel like that's super important with your training. Like, there is a little bit of like, there needs to be an enjoyment factor, and you enjoy doing it as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I just know for me, like from a mental load perspective, like just having more, like I just feel like working a little bit longer, like just having more in general, like that has definitely impacted my, and then I train after doing those things, like that overall mental load, I definitely feel like has impacted my ability to handle more training volume and like to do more overall and just be able to like give as much effort as I had in the past every single session.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
Cool, man. I guess anything coming out on your end that you want to let the audience know about or anything like that?
No, not really. Just got all the programs at Paragon. Brian's program is what I'm doing, so that's an option under the Paragon umbrella too. I got my podcast with Straker. He's now an IFBB pro.
Yep, that's
So we
crazy.
have, it's actually cool on the podcast now because we have like the guy that does steroids and he's like super jacked and he's an IFBB pro. And then we have the guy who's like natural, but still out there doing his thing, trying to do cardio. And so we have like this cool contrast between the two of us now, which I think is unique and cool. You don't see too many podcasts where there's like one guy who's enhanced and one guy who's not, and different perspectives that we can offer on that. So that's been fun as well.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. He's super freaking jacked now. It's insane. I mean, he was always like lean and jacked, but it's like crazy to see his like last couple years.
He literally in 1 year he went from 192 at 8% body fat to 220 at 8% body fat. Like he gained 28 pounds of pure muscle in a year basically.
That's freaking insane. It shows. You can definitely see in his physique. So, yeah, no, that's freaking awesome. So eat, train, prosper. Obviously, your guys' podcast there.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Appreciate your time, dude. It was always fun, like catching up and chatting about things. Obviously, get you on again in the future, man, and I'll chat with you soon.
Yep, sounds good.